And again, thank you very much and welcome. I'm going to share the first group of slides about the project of the mobility agreement in which this conference is organized. So I hope everyone can see the screen. So the presentation of today is titled Water Harvesting and Hydrology in the Argentinian drylands and hilly and mountainous areas in Italy. A synergistic effort because, of course, it's an international seminar organized by both the university. The seminar is organized within the framework of the project Moving ITALIANNESS, promoting innovation capacity in the higher education system of Argentina and Italia, through an action scheme for the mobility and cooperation of university students and professors. So this is a little bit the scheme of the project. You see that it's funded by the PNRR, who is Piano Nazionale di Ripresa and Resilienza. There is also a logo which was released in the latest day. And you see a little bit here the mobilities which are outgoing, so students that are Italian students and professors that are going to Argentina and the topics, and the incoming mobilities with, again, the topics. Our mobility is the one with Universidad Nacional de San Luis, which is titled Water Resources Management in Arid Areas, including Andean and Patagonia regions. So the project is organized in partnership with the Inter-University Consortium for Argentina, CUIA, which was established in 2002 and is a project of the Italian Ministry of Education as a part of an internalization initiative. And since, as you can see, is hybrid and we have several people connected from South America and Argentina, it's also included in the official program in the Jornadas del CUIA in Argentina, which is a program of hybrid and in-person seminar that is being developed just in these days. Besides that, a longer-term commitment of the University of San Luis and the University of Florence is an international agreement that lasts for 7 years. So me and Patricio are the coordinators. There are other interested researchers, and the topic of the agreement is hydrology and water resources management for agriculture and the environment. So we are within a long-term plan of collaboration, which is not at its first moment, but in 2023, we already won a mobility call grant by CUIA that lead us to host one webinar in Argentina. And we are also working on research. So in 2025, we already submitted a scientific paper, which is basically targeting a research area in Paraguay, but is still relevant to our collaboration, and the region is neighboring the region where the University of San Luis is working. Finally, this agreement can also open possibilities for UNIFI's students to go on mobility in Argentina. So for 2025-26, sorry for the typo, there were no applicants, but this call will be replicated next year. So we have 2 or 3 thesis proposals, and hopefully, like in 1 year, some students will be interested. So thank you very, very much for the attention. At this point, I will leave the floor to Professor Patricio Magliano for the first intervention of today, which is titled Water Harvesting in Small Dams in the Flat Rangelands of Central Argentina. We will have 4 small webinars today, 15-20 minutes. Maybe if times allow, we can have a quick question and answer after each seminar. So, Patricio, I'm just setting up the presentation for you.
You have the PowerPoint?
Yes, I have the PDF already. So I just a quick check to the virtual room. Probably there is a person that wants to enter. So it is inside now. So hoping that there will be no other project. I'm just sharing the screen and leave the floor to Patricio. Thank you very much.
Should go there. Let me see. Can I speak to the people, or should I be here? Okay. Can you listen to me, the people that are connected?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, well, so I prefer to speak to the in-person people, if you agree, Julio. So, well, thank you for the invitation, Julio. Thank you, Edgardo, for making possible my stay here in the University of Florence. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I am Patricio Magliano. I am agronomist. I will talk about water harvesting in small dams in the flat rangelands of Central Argentina. Okay, so the first thing that we have to consider when we speak about water harvesting, in my opinion, is the rainfall. But the rainfall is not only the mean annual rainfall, that is a typical variable that we take into account when we study these systems, but also we have to consider the spatial heterogeneity and the temporal variability. Okay, these 2 aspects are very important in these systems. I put this photo to illustrate the specific sites where we can have rainfall and the neighbors that do not receive this rainfall, which are a typical picture in drylands in general. And to show the temporal variability, I love this graph, which was developed by CANAP. It's a global change biology paper that shows the deviation in precipitation relative to the average years. So what is shown in this graph is that when we move towards drier sites, the variability of the rainfall is higher. While when you move towards a more humid sites, the variability becomes constant. Okay, this very huge variability in the drylands is part of the complex that these systems have. So the second thing that we have to consider is that we have the rainfall, which is very variable, but then this rainfall is converted into different fluxes. Okay, so here we have a scheme with all the fluxes that the rainfall can assume. Okay, for example, interception, which is the part of the rainfall that is storage in the canopy of vegetation and evaporated after this. And you have all the fluxes, okay? So it is highlighted in red the net runoff. This is a very small flux. In drylands, in general, we can consider that 1 or 2% of this rainfall is converted into runoff, okay? So it's a small flux in terms of the amount, but it's a very, very variable flux. If you can see this graph, the one that we have on your left, on your right, sorry, is showing the rainfall and the runoff, the cumulative relative contribution of each rainfall or runoff events to the total amount in a typical year. Okay, the curve of runoff is always above the curve of rainfall, which means that the runoff is more variable than the rainfall. For example, if you follow the dashed red line, you can see that the 6 events that have more runoff and more rainfall in a year explain the 50% of the rainfall and almost all the runoff of the year. Okay, so only 6 events in a year explains all the runoff that take place this year. Oh, a problem? No, it's okay. 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 I have to wait, or the people? Yes, I will do it. Yes. Well, so the challenge in drylands is to harvest this small and variable flux. Okay, this is the main thing that we have to consider if you want to produce or even if you want to live in drylands. So in these photos, you can see it happens almost always that we have dry sites, okay? As this picture shows, the soil is dry, we have no available water in the system, and we have a few days of the year when we have this, a flash flood, okay? That this has a duration of a couple of hours, maybe half a day, no more than this. So the challenge is to identify the sites where this flash flood occurs and harvest it. So the people, farmers and ranchers that live in the drylands of central Argentina, in a region. If the people is listening to me,
Yeah.
Sorry, we're listening, but we're not seeing the slides.
Yeah.
So it's probably due to the fact that that we have a little bit of standby of the projector, so probably it needs to be.
will you signal when the projector? Okay.
Okay, what about now? Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, there are more people late, so that's. Okay, so can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
And also with the full screen mode now?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks, Julio. So what the people, the farmers and ranchers that live in these drylands do is these small impoundments or dams to harvest the runoff that occurs these few days of the year. Okay, they make a small wall with the soil of the site to interrupt the circulation of the runoff in the landscape. So they generate like small lagoons or small shallow lakes and harvest this water during the dry season. Okay, so you can see here an example of this impoundment. It is located, as you can see, in the middle of a dry matrix. It's like a semi-desert. And here you have, with an oval, the cattle. Okay, some cattle that drink water in this impoundment, and these cattle represent the main production in these sites. Okay, today the ranchers build these impoundments to provide fresh water to cattle. This is the main economical activity of these sites of the central Argentina. So what we do, or our scientific aims, are to study these impoundments with a scientific and a technological purpose. Okay, And we consider two different things. On the one hand, we think a lot in the spatial scale, okay? For example, you have here, on your left, you have a figure that shows these impoundments in different scales, okay? At the region scale, landscape, stand, and patch. And what we can learn with this is, for example, some emerging elements, for example, cattle trails, and buffer rows, biospheres, which are some small areas which are close to the impoundments and are overgrazed and overtrampling by the livestock. So this type of elements appears when we assess the problems with a low level scale, okay? And the other thing that we consider is the incorporation of the people, the landscapes. As Julio showed you today in the morning, it is not enough to consider only the water and only the cattle. We need to consider the people. For example, this is was a workshop that we did with ranchers of a town of dry Chaco rangelands in the center of Argentina, where we discuss about the manage that they do with the livestock in their impoundments. Okay, so we cannot avoid this, the people today making silence. And some things that we are working on in these years, for example, Victoria Petit is working, trying to understand the drivers of the rainwater harvesting at the landscape scale, okay? She's trying to think and to understand how do the elements of the landscape, for example, the cattle trails, which are highlighted in orange, the roads, which are highlighted in yellow, and the biosphere, this overtrampling zone, can affect the runoff in the landscape, okay? So she's trying to understand how do the impoundments are filled. Then we have, for example, Maximiliano Gauron, who is working, trying to understand the water losses of the water harvesting systems once the water is stored into them, okay? He's not paying attention about the landscape. He say, okay, I have the water storage now in the impoundment, and he's trying to quantify the water losses during the dry seasons and to determine the relative contribution of the different outputs that we have in the impoundments. For example, evaporation, consumption, that is the desirable aim, okay, and infiltration. Here we have a typical graph that we use in which you have the water level along the time, and you have two different impoundments, okay? So they are filled in summer and they lost the water slowly during the dry season. And finally, Marcos Liborski is trying to integrate this data collecting at the field in a large scale, okay? He's doing satellite analysis in order to understand the distribution, the spatial distribution of these water points in the region or in the landscape, in order to, for example, identify hotspots of water harvesting systems, and then modeling in time in order to see what happened, for example, if we have an extreme dry year, okay? Try to model how will these impoundments, the water storage into the impoundments will respond to different climatic scenarios. So I will tell you some results that we are obtaining, that we have obtained during the last years. On the one hand, we have that livestock transit increases the runoff generation and the ecosystem connectivity towards the impoundment. Okay, so the cattle is not only the flux of consumption of the impoundment; it is part of the water generation process. Okay, to show this, you have here a watershed which is delimited with the this one, the red line. Okay, and then you have here the impoundment. So we measure a cattle trail close to the impoundment here, and we measure the same cattle trail 500 meters far away from the impoundment. Okay, what we saw is that when you are close to the impoundment, the cattle trail becomes wider and deeper. So it can transport more water. Okay, this is a way to show how the cattle can transform the system. Then you have here a bar graph in which that shows the saturated hydraulic conductivity and the penetration resistance of the soil, and that shows that the dry forest, the matrix of the dry forest, have a different behavior than for example, the biosphere, the trails, or the roads. So we can assume with this that the runoff does not occur as an uniform Ortonian flux. So it occurs in specific sites of the landscape. Okay. Another result is that the livestock trampling reduce the infiltration losses into the impoundments. Okay, so here you have different comparisons that we. Okay, it's okay. Different comparisons between the water level of impoundments that have cattle drinking water on them, and we compare them with impoundments that have not cattle. Okay, we did this in different papers. So when you see the blue lines, they are representing the impoundments with the cattle, and the red lines represent the impoundments without the cattle. And in all cases, we found that when the impoundment has the cattle drinking water, they function better. They lost less water, even considering that they have an extra output, that is the consumption by the cattle. Okay, so our hypothesis, we are trying to put into to test it, is that the cattle trampling generates a compaction in the bottom of the impoundment, and it reduces the infiltration losses. So the impoundments work better when the cattle drink water on them. I lost, let me see, maybe with the call.
Possible? I think.
Yeah. Is it okay?
Yeah.
People are connected?
Yeah.
Yes. The connection is okay?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So, as a conclusion, we have that the livestock transit and trampling transform the system, enhancing the rainwater harvesting processes. Okay, we try to make a picture, a cartoon that integrates these two things. Okay, the cattle transforming the landscape, enhancing or improving the runoff generation and the conduction to the impoundments. once the water is into the impoundment, the cattle reduce the infiltration losses, okay? So we have a good effect of the cattle trampling and transit on the landscape, which is not very intuitive. In general, when we think about cattle in drylands, we think in the opposite processes, in erosion, degradation, desertification also, okay? Yes, we do not contradict this, we agree with this, but we also say that if you can manage the livestock in this dry and plain landscape, you can generate better water points and can produce in them in a sustainable way, okay? So, well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So we have questions. So let's decide on the leader. You come here with your question, or Patricio, please repeat the question.
Okay. Do you want to come? Or no? No. Okay.
Are already natural there, and you just get them bigger, or is something which creates for this project?
Okay, well, it's a good question. No, they are not natural. They are artificial. They are made by the people that live in the field. Okay, what the people do is to identify the zones of the landscape that present the runoff signs, and in these sites they build the impoundment. Look at this here. This landscape, okay, this impoundment is totally artificial. So what you had there before this is the dry forest, as you have in the rest of the landscape. So the people do it artificially. 1 century ago, they did them with hand tools, and they were very small. Nowadays, they use machinery, I don't know the name in English, maquinaria, Giulio, agricola, machineries, okay, to do it larger. For example, typical size are 40 meters by 100 meters, okay, and they have between 1 and 2 meters deep in the deepest part. It's another good question. The cattle production started with these impoundments. When the first settlers, the first European people that came to these sites 100 or 2 centuries ago, okay, they want to produce cattle, which were not in these sites. Okay, they introduce the cattle to these sites, and they start digging these impoundments in different sites. So the production started with this. Okay, the cattle were not always there. Is this okay? Okay. Sorry. No, they do not, for example, put an island or compact the soil artificially. They do not do nothing. They understood that if the cattle goes and trampling every day, this is enough to have water to the winter, to the dry season. Okay. So at this moment, they are doing nothing with this. If they, in some cases, in other regions, in other neighbor regions, that they put an island in the floor in order to prevent the infiltration losses, they pass to another system because they cannot allow to enter the cattle because the cattle break the nylon, so they close the impoundment, they pipe water from another tank that is in the outside, and they generate a different system, okay? But in this region, in dry Chaco rangelands that are almost 10 million hectares in the center of Argentina, they work. Yes.
Water table, maybe there's some study on the changes in groundwater to come back and the analysis.
Okay, well, that is interesting, and I did not mention it. In these sites, in the center of Argentina, let me see, we have the map here. In the center of Argentina, okay, in this area that has 10 million hectares, groundwater is very deep, more than 100 meters, okay? So we assume, we are not sure, but we assume that there is no relation between the infiltration of the pipes and the groundwater, okay? But, for example, in Paraguay, in another region in Paraguay, groundwater is close to the surface, maybe 5 meters, okay? And in this case, the ranchers of Paraguay build impoundments in order to rise the water level and close the water level to the surface. And in this case, then can pipe the water from the groundwater, okay? Are different systems, but in this case, we can assume that groundwater does not exist.
Okay, so you don't have any wells that are measuring the
No, it's just this, yes. But no, in this case, no. Okay, but it's good question. I did not mention it. Okay, yes.
So maybe let's follow the next.
Yes, yes.
Sure. And maybe just check Patricio.
Yes, Patricio. Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to leave the discussion only for the people in the room, but it's very nice to have interaction. But we also have a good audience from I don't know, the online, almost 31 persons. So if someone wants to make a burning question, just drop them in the chat and we will record them later. And this is valid for all the presentations. So I'm moving to the next presentation that is still on the pipeline of water harvesting, and it's co-authored by me, Luigi Piemontese, and Elena Bresci, that are working in the water harvesting lab, and this is like to show the other country, to show basically what is done in Italy, which are the differences, which are the similarities, and which are the main issues related to water harvesting. So just, I wish to start with the definition. Me and Patricio, we are using the definition. We define, together with a large number of practitioners and scientists around the world, water harvesting as the process of concentrating precipitation through runoff and storing it for beneficial use. So it's basically something, it can be a small infrastructure or a big infrastructure where there is a catchment, rainfall is falling on a catchment. There is a civil engineering works that is used to collect runoff, and then there is a storage. And the storage can be the soil or another type of reservoir, either a cistern or a small pond. The effects of water harvesting at landscape scale are multiple. There is not only the effect of storing water in the soil or in one reservoir, but also there is a general overall landscape effect of increasing infiltration, subsurface flow and ground flow increase, and more evapotranspiration for making crops, or maybe more water for livestock. In turn, soil evaporation and quick runoff, and therefore erosion and flooding, are reduced to some extent. We have seen by the presentation of Patricio that, of course, there is infiltration from these ponds, generally speaking, infiltration is not something bad. It can be also good because I don't know if the groundwater is high, but in some parts of the world that's also happening. So in Italy, the main way of collecting water is very similar. We talk about small agricultural reservoirs. In the world, there are a lot of these reservoirs. The ones that are in Italy, they can be excavated, like the one that Patricio showed, but sometimes, especially because the landscape is different, we have more hills, more mountains, they have a dam. How it is defined a small agricultural reservoir in Italy, that is not that. So we define what is not a small reservoir. So there is a law that defines what a big reservoir. So a big dam called Grandi Dighe di Interesse Nazionale is something that has a dam height of over 15 meters or a volume of storage above 1 million cubic meters. While if you have something that is both with a dam height of 15 meters and below 1 million cubic meter of volume, this is something that is called a small dam. It can be a small agricultural reservoirs. Now, in this presentation, I'm talking of barriers, challenges, and opportunities. And you can see here immediately one. So for the big dams in Italy, there is a national regulation. For the small dam, there is a regional regulation. What does it mean? It means that in every region of Italy, the law is different, or at least slightly different, and different bodies are different. This is one of the first main limitations. Sorry, I'm jumping back in the call to include the people that are coming. And I don't know if there is a question. Yeah, this is all. So I hope you can still see the presentation. Please let me know.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
So now also to create a little bit of synergies between the PNRR project and how we analyze these barriers, I'm talking about one project that is called AguaMed, Advancing Non-Conventional Water Management for Innovative Climate Resilient Water Governance in the Mediterranean area. In this project, we are promoting a series of participatory activities and modeling to include non-conventional water use, like runoff and water harvesting, within water governance policies. We are working in Italy, and through our work in Italy, we are basically exploring a lot of these difficulties that stakeholders are having, and it's a similar approach to the one of Patricio. You can see here a little bit of data. It's 36 months. We have 8 partners, 7 countries involved. We have 4 living labs, and the PI is Elena Bresci, that is also connected and is co-authoring this presentation. So, just a little bit of theory. We are working in AguaMed using living labs, so open innovation ecosystem based on the systematic co-creation with users. What are we doing? We are trying to engage stakeholders in group meetings since the beginning of the project to highlight how to improve water management through non-conventional water and specifically to small reservoirs in Italy. And we are trying to listen them. We are trying to highlight which are the difficulties in management. And this gave us quite a very good overview of, at least for Tuscany, which are the main difficulties. So we had like 4 meetings and also like we have a transboundary living lab that is between Tunisia and Algeria. In that place, the meetings were alternate, but the most important thing is that we are really working in the landscape. We are really working together with local practitioners. Which is the case study? So something similar, respect the case study of Patricio, not similar as landscape, but as important. So Patricio is dealing with livestock production in Argentina, which is probably the most famous food production in Argentina. We are dealing with wine in Tuscany. So we are working in Valdorcia. Valdorcia is the valley of River Orcia in the south of Tuscany. Is a UNESCO heritage site. There is not reliable surface and groundwater, and there is a lot of climate change. At the same time, in Valdorcia, there are a lot of small agricultural reservoirs that were used in the past and that were a little bit abandoned because wine does not need that much water, but in the current climate scenario, water is needed because to improve the production or to save the production, sometimes you need to make a little bit of irrigation. If you want to implement a new vineyard, you have to make a lot of irrigation in the early stages, so on and so forth. So the project is really working with this perspective. Take the old reservoirs and see if they can be used and how, and analyzing which are the barriers. So you see here that basically in Valdorcia, we have a lot of very small reservoirs, and this is also a huge difficulty at the national and regional scale, and quite a few small, let's say small reservoirs, but near to the threshold of 1 million cubic meter. What does it mean? That we have a lot of artifacts that are very small and that still need to undergo a regional regulation because it's regional, but that is quite heavy. So for one reservoir that is below 5,000 cubic meters, you have to have the same regulation of more or less 500,000 cubic meters. So that's something, you know. So what are we doing in the Liver Lab? So we did 4 workshops and we try to engage the stakeholder, asking them which are the problems. So part of the problems are the fact that these regulations that I mentioned so far, they hinder the restoration of the old agricultural reservoirs and the implementation of new ones. And there are very severe sedimentation problems. The stakeholders ask an improvement and simplification of regulations, try to implement possibly community irrigation development, but also increase awareness on erosion control practices, which are key to fight against erosion. Then in the second workshop, we developed some modeling and we try together with the stakeholders to develop more modeling scenarios. We check the models and so on and so forth. We still highlighted more or less the same issues, but we advance also in the modeling. Now, I'm not spending very much time on the results of modeling because they are beyond the scope of this presentation, but I'm just give you quite an highlight on just the building of the model. So we are working with an hydrological model, which is a software working on GIS, and our issue was how to represent over 1,000 small reservoirs with a very small area in our model to understand which was the impact of the management scenarios proposed by the Living Lab. So we did this together with the farmers because they know better the landscape. We found out some solutions, so on and so forth, but this wouldn't be impossible without connecting with local farmers, because sometimes, and I think Patricio can confirm this, managing a lot of small infrastructure in the landscape, it's impossible without the knowledge of people that have been living there since like decades. After this information collected for the model, we ended up proposing an integrated watershed management plan. So namely a series of actions to be implemented, which represent what we propose, at least for our Living Lab, as possible solution to overcome these problems of managing water for being resilient to climate change with small agricultural reservoirs. To do so, we use quite an advanced methodology, which is called RRI Roadmap. If you are interested, we can share some information with you. The methodology has basically a copyright, so you need to pay a limited amount to use it, but it's very, very good. So our plan is organized by a vision and 4 objectives and different measures and actions. And the vision is by 2040, all Valdorcia farms will be able to cope with droughts, to integrated landscape management, and access reliable irrigation water. So the objective was to promote the restoration of the existing small agricultural reservoirs, to promote the realization of new reservoirs in suitable areas, to try to valorize the multi-purpose utilization of reservoirs. This is a point that is very important. So sometimes, especially when they are a little bit bigger, reservoirs can be used for different activities, livestock, maybe domestic use if you need them to wash, some surfaces that you can use for fighting wildfires and so on and so forth. And this facilitates the implementation of them because they have multiple use. And then, of course, to promote knowledge for building integrated water management solutions. The measures are supporting the coordination among stakeholders to simplify regulation, but this is not very easy because these are national and regional regulation, and you cannot buy a living lab which is big but small with reference to the region or the country, change the regulation. But what we have done, and we are in contact with Tuscany regions for this, is to develop guidelines to improve basically the way in which people are building reservoirs. This is very important because the point is that there is not one regulation. There are multiple regulations. Regulation for the water use, regulation, environmental regulation. You have to follow also seismic regulation if you have one dam. So there is not one rule. There are different national and regional charts that you have to follow. And stakeholders need a guideline to see when you use one, when you use the other one. And then you see also other solutions that we proposed, but some, they are very, very interesting also for the stakeholders, and I mean for all the stakeholders. So you see that one is create a network of technicians that they have experience and putting them in contact with the farmers. This is interesting not only for the farmer, but is interesting also for the technician that has like an access to the market. And of course, the important thing is that when you work with a living lab, you work basically not only with the farmers, but farmers, institutions, small, medium enterprise, so on and so forth. Finally, one very remarkable result is that this living lab is listed in the Water for All Atlas of Water-Oriented Living Lab that was realized like not later than February 2025, but is a huge result because there are only 5 living labs in Italy that are listed in this atlas, and this is probably the only one that is working with reservoirs and water harvesting. Finally, we are also developing some research on that, but probably the most advanced result, so the ones that are about the living lab and the modeling, they are still to be published. Main conclusions, so I don't know if this is the case for Argentina, but this is one of the main points. So water harvesting is great. We have a lot of results that show how it can implement water resilience, but they are very small infrastructure, which means regulation can be national or subnational, can be intertwined, and you need really to study them as a whole. One of the problems, I think probably also for Patricio, this is it, is sedimentation. So the volume is small, okay? It's not like the 3 gorge dam. So if there is even like a small sedimentation, it can give you a lot of problems. And of course, specialized experts are needed for the implementation. And since there are a lot of small infrastructure, collaborative modeling is often the best way to understand the system. But of course, stakeholders involvement, and I mean all the stakeholders, not only the farmers, the practitioners, the research, the institutions, also civil society to some extent for the environmental problem is very needed. This is what we learn through like an hands-on project in one area where this infrastructure, they are key for water management. So these are the main information about the project. I encourage you to have a look if you are interested. And yeah, that's all on my side. So I don't know if you have a question. I'm very happy to answer. Thank you. And we have, oh, please.
I guess two questions. One question.
Mm-hmm.
What do you, so it's mentioned as an issue.
Yeah.
But possible solutions. I know you didn't see your quick stand downs. Like what other students do you have?
Yeah, yeah. That's the first one.
Yeah, that's the other one is more like, because I don't know much about this, but what about water rights? Like if you start harvesting water, is there an issue with potentially stream diversion or eruption of water rights? Like CUIA water.
You mean if there is an upstream, downstream issue? Okay.
Yeah.
So no, thank you. This is a good question. So I'm just repeating the questions for the audience. The first question is about how to deal with sedimentation. So there are multiple ways. Like most of the, let's say, advanced users in Val d'Orcia, which are very commercial farm, Castello Banfi, which is a very important winemaking, they are having like some pre-reservoirs before the reservoir. So all the sedimentation happen in the pre-reservoir and then that is emptied. Then you can have maybe some kind of nature-based solution. We are thinking about some filter strips in the pre-reservoir to reduce erosion. You can try some agricultural manage like the keyline design, so on and so forth. There is one which is the king problem, I would say, that is the basically getting rid of the sediment, which affect also the pre-dam. You know why? Because we are talking about agricultural landscapes. So in agricultural landscape, people give pesticides, like agrochemicals. And if these stay in the soil, then the sludge at the bottom of the reservoir is, in theory, classified as a special waste in Italy. Because it's not only soil, it's soil plus agricultural waste. So you need to spend a lot, or to make some advanced analysis to show that the earth, the soil that you are taking out from anywhere is still like pristine soil. Okay, so this is, I mean, we are doing research, of course, there is a huge amount of discussion to be made, keep them aside. Then the second question is about upstream, downstream effect. So if you retain water, which will be the effect downstream. So this is a highly contextual point, because in some climates, this can be a problem, in other climates, it can be. Overall, there are some research that is showing that in most of cases, upstream, downstream issue with small scale water harvesting or water harvesting like this is not such a big deal. And also our model demonstrated this. So this is the case also of Val d'Orcia. Okay, so there is not a shift even if you collect a lot of water. But in all the application, this cannot be excluded. Okay, so maybe this is not a problem in the rangelands because there is not a huge hydrologic network, but in Val d'Orcia it is, or it could be. Results show that this is not, but this is not in Val d'Orcia. Okay, thank you very much. So if you don't mind, I will leave the floor to the second part of the seminar that is about hydrology. We have the first speaker is Maria Poja, and then we have Daniele Penna. So Maria, if you want to share your screen, and yes. Thank you. Of course, I'm mindful that the seminar will end later at 6 in Italy, but it was hybrid with Argentina, so we could not do it in the morning. Thank you, Maria. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Julia. Please let me know if you can see it in full screen mode.
Yes, it's perfect.
Yes?
Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to, well, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation, and I am happy to be joining at least online to give this seminar. So my presentation is named Eco-Hydrological Processes and Water Services in Semi-Arid Mountains of Central Argentina. I work in the same research institute as Patricio does, but as you can see, I have gone far away from the flatlands and I'm going up into the mountains. So just to give a little bit of context, Macmillan in a recent paper, let me put the, give me just 1 second to put the pointer, yes. So Macmillan in a recent paper has shown how in arid and semi-arid regions, it's an axis of aridity, you can see how many works of hydrological processes mainly are found for different climatic regions in the world. And you can see that semi-arid regions have far less works published on different hydrological processes, and also there's a gap for different processes around the world for South America. So this gives me space for my research line, that is eco-hydrology of semi-arid mountains, mainly focused in central Argentina, in these gray mountains that you can see over here. These are extra-Andean mountains, so they do not depend from the Andes, and they range from 2,000 to 4,500 meters above sea level, around that elevation. So my main research questions are where, when, and how water flows in semi-arid mountains. I also focus on water provisioning services for human intake. And for this, I measure flow paths, velocities, and magnitudes of water in soil, plants, and streams. For this, I use different approaches like satellite and databases, and also different type of sensors or different type of tracers that allow me to follow the water molecule along its path through the hydrological processes. So in case I didn't convince you that this is super important and interesting, I wanted to show these maps over here where we are showcasing how water yield spans in Argentina. So our research area, that is this one over here, has low water yield from, I would say, 1 to 600 or so millimeters per year. And we have also done a study several years ago where we looked for information of where the cities of all Argentina were taking water from and which were their sources of supply. And we understood that most of this region is uptaking water from streams or dams. So studying how water is produced in those mountains is very important for management reasons. And if we combine this information of water yield and water intake for supply to cities, we can build this type of map over here. I won't get into the details. I discussed on this on the previous CUIA workshop last year. But most importantly, I am showing in this map with different colors the number of inhabitants in the territory that depend on that single cell for obtaining water from superficial or groundwater. And again, these are the water towers for over 4 million people, so they're important, and they range from 300 millimeters of precipitation per year to 900 millimeters per year. So in work that we have been doing with Ivan Barbero, that is one of my PhD students, this has been led by him. We have been looking into 26 catchments, long-term stream flow data of 26 catchments in the same region that I showed you in the previous maps. You can see the catchments displayed over here. So they range in precipitation gradient from 300 to 850 millimeters per year. And we obtain biophysical variables that include climatic, topographic, morphometric, land cover, and lithologic variables. to try to understand how water yield varies along these gradients. So what we learned so far is that if we compare the mean annual water yield, that's the observed water yield, compared to the estimated water yield by a simple water model balance, we can see that there are a lot of catchments that follow that 1-1 line, but there are a lot of catchments that plot above that line. And these catchments the water yield of these catchments is being underestimated by these common simple mass balance models. So what explains this difference is that these catchments have low drainage densities, and also they have a high rocky cover, and I will get into this later on. Also, what we did is to, and don't panic, I'm not going to talk about all these graphs, but I wanted to show you that we analyzed how different variables for water yield, that is mean annual water yield, flow index, dry season, average water yield, and several more, how are they explained by all these 20 biophysical variables that I mentioned before that we also obtained for each of these 26 catchments. So I will focus only in the Q-mean, that is the mean water yield for all the years that we obtain streamflow data for each of those catchments. And what we understood is that catchments with higher mean annual water yield present mid to low drainage density, low woody cover, high precipitation, low aridity index, and a high rocky cover in their land cover formation of the catchments. If we concentrate in the headwaters of the most humid catchments that we analyzed in the previous work, in this other study that I collaborated with Anna Singolari, that is my former PhD advisor, what we did is to measure low flows. That low flows are the dry season streamflow measurements in these 33 headwater catchments, as I mentioned, in this zone, that they range around the 900 millimeters of precipitation per year. And we also obtained 11 topographic variables and 12 vegetation variables to try to understand what can explain how low flow varies in the landscape. And what we learned is that water yield, remember that this is under low flow conditions, vary and is higher when we have landscapes that are more covered by a mosaic of grasslands and rocks, also when the slope is intermediate, and also when we have intermediate cover of rocks, rocky covers, and also when the plains occupy the less space, let's say, in the catchment. Now, if we move to the south of our study region, and this is actually 30 kilometers away of our research institute, and we focus in these other two catchments that we have been studying with Ivan also for his PhD thesis for monitoring precipitation, streamflow, and also water samples for tracers. In these catchments, we are trying to understand how streamflow dynamics vary through time and in space in these two catchments, that you can see that we have one that is bigger than the other one. So this is what we call the river catchment and the Chico River catchment. And also trying to understand which are the source generation for each of both catchments. You can see with different points where we are measuring streamflow, here precipitation. So we measure streamflow only in the outlet of the catchment, not in the headwaters. And what we have learned so far is that water yield in both catchments, you can see in red here, the trend from 2021 until, this is the latest data is from April of this year, water yield of the Grande River in red and the Chico River in green. And you can see that there's a trend of decay in the water yield through time along these first 2-3 years from 2021 until, I would say, March 2024. And this is coincident with several years of lower precipitation than the average. You can see here a long trend of precipitation in San Luis City, that is the closest station that we have for long-term data of precipitation for the region. And we have several, like 5 years of under the average precipitation previous to this moment. Interestingly, we can see here a peak in March 2024, and you can see in this picture that there was a seep where normally it has groundwater that is pouring water to the stream. And in January, that is our summer, so I'm sorry I didn't say this, but during spring and summer, the precipitation here is concentrated. You can see here in these parts of the plot that are not gray, these are the rainy seasons. So we used to have a lot of water coming out from this seep in this moment, but it was dry. And then on March of the same year, I cannot, give me just 1 second, please. So I can show you the video. You can see that water is being poured out from that seep in March, and that is coincident with the peak that you can see over here. It is also interesting that in March of this year, we can see that there's again a peak in stream flow for a water yield for the Grande River, and this is even a bigger peak than the one from last year. And I need to remember you that this is under base flow conditions, so these are monthly measurements. These are not continuous measurements, but monthly measurements. And this value is almost equal to how everything started on 2021. So it seems like the river is catching up with the rain. However, for the Chico River, you can see that the trend of decline somehow keeps going until this point. And I think I will show you some data of continuous stream flow data that will explain better this. So in the plot here below, you can see how O18, that is a stable isotope for oxygen in this case, of rainfall in blue, or for the Grande River in red, and for the Chico River in green, and also for seeps that are associated to each of the both rivers, sorry. You can see that precipitation is very fluctuating in time. However, rivers and streams seem to be flattened and they don't seem to respond quite much. Well, they have some peaks, but mostly they don't respond that much to precipitation. However, remember, not post-event sampling samples, but they are monthly base flow condition samples. So if we want to understand a little bit more of water sourcing, we need to do a big plot of both isotopes of the water molecule. And you can see over here how the precipitation plots, and we build a local meteoric water line that you can see over here. It's a slope and intercept. And given its intercept is quite high, we can discuss that there's a lot of moisture recycle inputs in this region. And this has been already stated before, that we have inputs from the Amazonian basin and also from the La Plata basin, that is recycled moisture that is being recycled along its movement through the continent until it pours in our region. We also have more negative values over here that come more related to inputs from the Pacific slope. And we can see over here in the middle of the distribution of the precipitation samples how the Grande River seeps and stream flow, and also the Chico River and its seeps plot. And if we do a zoom over here, we can see that the Grande River samples, they plot a little bit below to the Chico River. And this is interesting because these samples being depleted in stable isotopes may show that they have more negative inputs from higher altitudes of precipitation in the catchment, and we have a huge area in this catchment of that is covering 200 meters above the headwaters of the river. So now, to try to understand if this is what could be explaining this pattern, we have put a collector over here in the headwaters, and we're trying to compare precipitation, isotopic composition, and inputs in both collectors. Sorry. So we also established two sensors to measure stream flow and precipitation in a continuous manner. So we have been measuring since October 2023 till the present. I'm sorry, this is not up to date. Water yield and also rainfall, and you can see how both catchments respond to the peaks of rainfall. However, the Chico River seems to be more responsive than the Grande River, and this is interesting because it responds mostly to, or it also responds to events that are below 20 millimeters of rainfall, and the Grande River mostly responds to events that are bigger than 20 millimeters. However, when an event is huge, that it would be over 50 millimeters per millimeters, you can see that the stage of the river, it doesn't only make up a spike, but it also sustains a higher base flow for a prolonged time. However, the Chico River doesn't respond in that same manner. So this is very interesting to understand how these two catchments that are completely next to each other respond to the same events. What we are now working on is to understand how stream flows, hydrograph separation can be done, and understand the inputs of old water and new water of each event of different magnitudes. And for this, what we have been working on is on samplers for precipitation and stream flow that are passive, and they collect water as the level rises in the stream, and the water sequentially fills different jars of precipitation. But this hasn't been totally insightful, so we're now moving into automatic samplers, and this is something that we have been collaborating with Benjamin Fischer from Uppsala University through the master thesis of Mikhail Alexandrakis, and now is working. So hopefully for next rainy season, we will have cool data on this to show. So lastly, I wanted also to show some results of the PhD thesis of Evelyn Gonzalez, who's also a PhD student of mine, who is working in the same catchments, but concentrating on the moche trees water relations. That is this tree over here that you can see the beautiful leaves. And what we have been doing is following a hill slope approach, where we have trees in the riverside, in the mid slope, and also in the higher topographic positions, and they are associated to different type of substrates. So the river, the soil, or the rock. You can see over here a picture of how trees are completely submerging their roots into the rocks. It's incredible. And they are probably having the water that they are uptaking is probably groundwater. However, the ones that are in the mid slope, they are probably obtaining water from soil that is rainwater fed. And then the rivers that are along the side of the river, the trees that are along the side of the river are probably uptaking water from the river. This is our hypothesis. So for understanding how they are doing in terms of water relations, we have been measuring plant functional traits that are leaf area, specific leaf area, and wood density. Also, we have been measuring water potential through time, that I will show you afterwards. And also, we have been doing some water sourcing attempts, doing cryogenic extractions and also centrifuge extractions of water from soils and xylem in the different positions, but we have been really struggling with this, so I won't be showing data on this. And we also measure with satellite the NDVI, that is somehow that give us an idea of how well the trees are performing through their greenness, if they are doing well or not. So we have 6 transects, 6 trees per topographic position or substrate. And let me show you some results of this. Over here, you can see a B-plot, the first 2 axes of a PCA. So this is a principal component analysis based on the different trees that are the different dots. And they are all the variables that are leaf area, specifically leaf area, wood density, NDVI, and water potential at midday. And you can see the different colors for the different substrate or the associated topographic position. And the most important results over here is that the second axis was mostly explained by the leaf water potential that is also coincident with how the trees from the soil or the mid-slope are distributed, and the trees from the soil in average present the higher values of leaf water potential, and higher values are more positive values that show that these trees are performing better. So they're doing better through time in terms of high water relations. And the first axis was mostly determined by leaf area and the NDVI, and this is also coincident with the distribution of the trees from the river position. And well, they have a variety, but they are somehow in the middle of the plot. And the trees from the rock, they display mostly on the middle of the plot, so they're not associated to in particular to any of these variables. If we move forward, and I promise this last slide of results, to understanding how the water potential varies through time, you can see that we have a sample in the wet season of 2023, of 2024, and this year, and also in the dry season of 2024, and we're going to mention this dry season that would be in September or around September. So we measured the water potential under pre-dawn conditions, but also at midday. That is the most important one because it's the most where the evaporative demand is higher. So I will only focus on this graph over here. And you can see in different colors how the river, soil, and rock trees display through time in average. And the most important thing is that we also see in leaf water potential this decay that we have seen in the water yield through time until March 2024. Remember, here's also the peak of water yield in 2024 March. Until this moment, the tree in the riverside were doing better than the other ones because they have more positive values. However, when the wet conditions are reestablished, the trees in the soil seem to be doing better, and this sustained through time until the present, that we can see that all trees from all positions are doing very similarly and better. So what we hypothesize is that the riparian trees regulate the availability of resources, and this would reflect a greater regulation of leaf area and NDVI due to a more secure access to river water and nutrient leaching. However, soil trees would regulate mostly the leaf water potential, which would be associated with a more unstable water source, that is rain. The rocky trees would have like an intermediate strategy, benefiting from the rainfall that is possibly associated with water in the cracks and fissures of the rocks, and also with a substrate that is poor in resources such as carbon or phosphorus. So some key messages so far, because this is all a work in progress, mostly it's not published data. At a regional scale, the drainage density, woody cover, rock cover, aridity, precipitation are key controlling factors of water yield. At the more humid headwaters, where we have around 900 millimeters per year, the landscapes are covered by a mosaic of grasslands and rocks. with intermediate slope and roughness, which are the ones that have higher water yields during the low flow conditions, that is the dry season. In the Suzuki catchments, that are the ones that I showed more of the results, we have a precipitation of 600 millimeters, so it's a little bit more drier than the other one. Here, dry years had a huge impact, reducing base flows and impacted negatively also on the plant water status. And the present humid year seem to have been alleviating these effects for the whole components of the ecosystem. So overall, I hope I convinced you that these are key territory for water provisioning services, and we are totally open for collaborations, and whoever wants to join us for learning more on these catchments would be well received. And this is the team. So as I mentioned, these are the PhD students. This is an undergrad student. I didn't show results on her, but she's working a very interesting precipitation gradient. I'm also collaborating with several researchers and the technicians who are a super important part of our research. They are doing a lot of field and lab for us, and without them we could not have all this data. So we have a lot of institutions we have been collaborating with and the funding. And with that, I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maria. Very, very interesting. And I don't know if there are some questions also from the audience online.
May I ask a question, Giulio, please?
Go, Daniele, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria, for your very interesting presentation. Congratulations on your work. I have just a couple of hopefully short questions. First, if the underestimation of the model, of the water balanced based model, what can be the role of tree transpiration on that underestimation by the model? Sorry, overestimation. And the second one is about isotope data, but maybe we can go one by one.
Great, thank you, Daniele. Let me share the screen again. I think it would be easier. If I come back to this plot over here, I didn't mention this because it was a lot of information, but you can see that the colors of the catchments, they are different based on the woody cover. Yeah. And you can see that these underestimated catchments are the ones that have the lower proportion of woody cover, and they're mostly covered by grasslands, and they have a lot of this variable that we call grassland and rocky cover, because you cannot separate both from, they are very associated. Actually, if you see this picture over here in the over there, maybe you can see it, a lot of these type of outcrops, rocky outcrops with grasslands, and actually that was one of the most important variables for this other study that we did with Anna. But I would say that is not transpiration, but rather evapotranspiration. So maybe meaning the evaporative demand, we have, I'm sorry, I will try to organize my ideas. We also have an important bias of more humid catchments over here. So maybe there's we didn't have a transpiration variable, let's say, but we can somehow associate it to the land cover. So if we have less woody cover and we have more grasslands, we would assume that the transpiration is less than in these ones that are more woody. I don't know if not necessary.
No, I think it makes sense. I mean, or it can play a role at least. Yeah. Thank you. And then the second question is about the no, if you can share the screen again. Sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Because I was intrigued by the position of not only the values, but the position of the Chico samples, which actually fall also above the meteoric water line. So it's not only a difference in terms of not so negative values, but also in terms of position compared to the meteoric water line. So I wonder if there is actually if somehow the meteoric water line or the samples of the rain you collected are not so representative for the water collected in that catchment.
Well, that's very interesting. Actually, they are more resembled to the groundwater, the SIP samples that we call, that is groundwater, than the actual precipitation samples of the same period. So
what is the background, the geological setting? So might this be old water that is somehow coming out and basically feeding the base stream, the base flow?
Yes, totally. Actually, we're now doing tritium to try to understand how old this water is, because this is mostly granite, the substrate, first of all, and also this is mostly groundwater fed. So I didn't show this, but we have also been measuring radon, that is a radioactive tracer that can explain us when groundwater is found in the stream flow, and we can see that there are very high values of radon in different moments. Not only, sometimes it's associated to pushes of rainfall, let's say, because you can see that after a rainfall event you have a spike, but there's also in dry season conditions. So it's not very we cannot find a pattern for these radon values in stream. So we think that they are mostly fed by groundwater. And of course, you can see the spikes with the rain events, but the water that is flowing in the stream is mostly old rainfall, now groundwater.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree with this interpretation. It's super interesting. I stopped making questions because time flies. Thank you so much. I have other questions, but maybe for a later discussion, Maria. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe now Maria will take revenge because you are presenting, so be careful about that. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I'm very glad there is so many questions. Now, I mean, we should be very mindful of time, and I leave the floor to Daniele, but keep in mind that this is an ongoing collaboration lasting 7 years, so we will have more opportunities. So Daniele, I think you know how to share.
Thanks a lot, Giulio, for organizing this meeting, and hi, everybody. I will try to be quite synthetic, not to over exceed the time, about 6 o'clock, at least in Italy. And what I would like to talk about today is about some interaction and feedback mechanisms between ecological and hydrological processes in an experimental catchments in the Mediterranean area. Understanding the relationship that occur in forested ecosystems is really important in order to understand how they vary over time and in space, and how they govern eco-hydrological response of forested catchment, and in the end they regulate forest water availability and can help supporting management of water and forest resources. In forest ecosystems, precipitation is of course strictly linked to soil moisture, drives basically soil moisture availability. And soil moisture is also related as a positive effect with evapotranspiration. At the same time, soil moisture is also affected by evapotranspiration, which tends to reduce soil moisture. Evapotranspiration is basically driven by soil radiation, temperature, and vapor pressure deficit, so the atmospheric demand Maria was talking about before. And this is already, is again linked to the availability of water in the soil. So understanding how all these feedback and these processes, positive and negative interactions, change over time is really interesting and important in order to understand how forest ecosystem works. In particular, in the current work we are doing in these months, we are trying to understand about the role of hislop topography because we are working in a mountain environment. So how hill topography or catchment topography actually modulates these eco-hydrological feedbacks and linkages. Basically, the questions we addressed are how topography affects soil moisture availability and spatial variability, how topography affects the variability over space about intersection, and how does hill topography affects the spatial variability of tree transpiration. And we try to address these questions by using the Re della Pietra experimental catchment as an example of typical mountain forested catchments in the Mediterranean area. It's in the Apennines, not far from Florence. There you can see the red point here. It's let's say a mid-altitude catchment up to 1,300 meter above sea levels. Precipitation is around 1100s, and it's dominated by trees. More than 95% is basically beech trees, oak trees, and pine trees. And importantly, the geology is basically limestone, so it is highly fractured and potentially prone to deep water percolation. And you can see a couple of pictures here. And this is the intense experimental apparatus we set up over the years with lots of efforts in time, projects, and money and resources and personal resources to monitor different eco-hydrological variables, including stream flow, including soil moisture, different positions, including groundwater wells. And in this upper part, you can see, the arrow pointing out to a small 30 hectares subcatchment, the Lechona subcatchment. Here we are monitoring through flow, stem flow, sap flow, dendrometers through different international collaboration. Plus, we are taking isotope samples or samples for isotopes analysis along all the different positions in the stream and in the springs and in the rain and in the soil and in the trees. And the database now extends since 2019. So these are different pictures of the catchments. The main idea was why to establish a new experimental catchment since there are so more all over the world. And basically, the idea, as I pointed out in two recent commentary on hydrological processes in natural water, every catchment is unique, although at some point, some processes can be thought as similar among catchments. And by comparing multiple catchments, we can try to go toward a generalization of hydrological processes and eco-hydrological processes all over the world. So the Re della Pietra is a perennial stream, so the main stream always flows during all the seasons. However, it's highly seasonal, and so the dynamics are really, really different. You can see dry period and then much wetter period on the bottom picture. So seasonality is an important force in addition to topography. You can see again a picture in summer and a picture during a spring flood. So in the first questions we can try to approach, we ask ourselves, how does such a steep topography of the hill in the upper part of the catchment affect the spatial distribution of water, of tree response, and soil moisture, and intersection? So we actually put these very, very highly technological rainfall collectors of 1.8 euros each in order to collect true-false samples all over the hill. You can see here these white jars here. They actually were positioned along 2 grids and 1 transect. Plus, in some trees close to the stream is basically here. There is a stream and here is the hill. So in 3 trees on the riparian area, very close to the stream, and 3 trees in the middle part and 3 trees in the upper part of the hill, we also installed sap flow sensor to monitor sap flow velocity. Plus, we installed soil moisture sensor again in the riparian area, very close to the stream, in the middle and in the middle part of the hill. These hexagons here are groundwater flows, but I'm not talking about groundwater today. So again, another catchment is the lower part of the hill. You can see that the trees in the near stream positions. These are some sensors that measure set flow, and this the top the hill slope starts. It's really a very nice place where to work. So this plot shows the seasonality in meteorological forcing over 4 years of monitoring data. The upper part is precipitation, and the orange line represents temperature. You can see very clear seasonal dynamics. The gray bar represent dry periods. And you can see that the green line and the red line show soil moisture in the hill slope position and riparian position respectively. It is interesting to see the different dynamics of soil moisture in both in these two positions. In the hill slope position, the green line, soil moisture is much more reactive to precipitation inputs, and during the wetting up periods, so the transition between dry and wet periods, soil moisture tends to be higher and more responsive to precipitation. However, riparian zones tend to be more damped and less reactive to precipitation. And the second important difference is during the dry conditions, when soil moisture, the red line, in the riparian area is actually always higher compared to soil moisture in the hill slope zone, because of the topographic convergence first, but also due to the thick layer of beech tree leaves that actually produce a 50 centimeters liter layer that actually prevent evaporation from the soil. And this has a very important role on tree transpiration. We will see this in a minute. So basically, we have this kind of distribution along the hill slope. The upper part is less wet. The lower part of the hill slope is more wet, is wetter, okay? This actually translate very clearly in the growth of the trees. Trees growing in the lower part of the hill slope have more constant access to water, and they actually are bigger, a larger size, as you can see in the basal area, compared to the trees which grow in the upper part of the hill slope, where the basal area is lower, so that means they are smaller, and it is also clearly visible at a visual inspection. This difference in size also translates in different in canopy cover. So trees in the lower part of the hill slope are cover more and have a larger canopy compared to trees in the upper part of the hill slope, with, of course, a clear distinction between the seasons, as you can see in the right panel of this plot. This difference in tree size and canopy cover translates into different intersection. Of course, the trees in the upper part of the hill slope, which are smaller, intersect less compared to the trees in the lower part of the hill slope that intersect more. So even over 60 or 80 meters of this hill slope trunks, we can see clear spatial dynamics in this process. The second effect is on soil moisture response. So here we actually distinguish between two types of responses. The work by Costantino Caffas. It is not in review, this paper. It was accepted right today in Journal of Hydrology. And actually, Constantinos analyzed different rainfall runoff events types, and he distinguished between sequential and non-sequential responses of soil moisture. Particularly, the non-sequential responses are characterized by an early response to precipitation input of soil moisture in the deep layer, the red line, compared to a later response of soil moisture in the upper part of the layer. And this is an indication of preferential flow that somehow bypasses the first centimeters and then quickly drives soil moisture response. And you can see again that over time, and these are the soil moisture series, you can see a certain pattern of this sequential and non-sequential responses in the top, middle, and lower part of the hill slope. Particularly in the top part, some non-sequential responses dominate, and in the middle part, then sequential responses dominate. We also applied a tree forest algorithm, so machine learning approach, in order to understand which are the controls on these different responses. And we could see that actually topographic weather needs index, as well as antecedent soil moisture, are the two most important controls on this type of soil moisture response. The next step is to look at what happens in the relations between tree response in terms of sap flow, so the velocity of sap flow in the trees, and the atmospheric demands in terms of vapor pressure deficit in different dry periods. So we focus on dry periods, and we use the sort of index to distinguish between different types of droughts. I'm not showing the index here for the sake of brevity. And here we can see the relation between the vapor pressure deficit and sap flow during no drought conditions, mild, moderate, and severe drought conditions. During no, mild, and moderate drought conditions, sap flow during the day tends to react very quickly because there is moisture available in the soil, there is high atmospheric demand, the trees tend to react very quickly and produce high values of sap flow that anticipates the atmospheric demand. So that sap flow peaks before the vapor pressure deficit. However, when we have very severe drought conditions, you can see that sap flow is highly reduced. Just look at the scale. We go up to 25 or 30 centimeters per hour during no drought or moderate droughts, and we go up to 6 during severe drought conditions. Plus, the sap flow doesn't respond so quickly, and therefore there is a sort of simultaneous response with VPD. So in these cases of moderate or no droughts, we have an hysteresis in the relationship between VPD and sap flow, which is lacking during severe drought conditions. And the role of topography is very evident also in tree responses. This is one growing seasons, and the blue dots represent sap flow velocity in the upper part of the hislop, orange middle, and green bottom part of the hislops. You can see that at the beginning, the different trees, basically, they transpire in a very similar way, and particularly even during the central part of the growing season, the upper part transpire even a little bit more. But then all of a sudden, in this position, in this time of the growing season, the trees in the upper part of the season experience a sudden drop in transpiration rates, or mean sap flow velocity. And actually, the other trees tend to continue transpiring in the same way. But there is a clear reduction in mean sap flow velocity in the upper trees. And this actually reflects a clear drop in soil moisture conditions. So basically, this is a kind of anisohydric behavior of the trees, which means they tend to close their stomata in order to transpire less and to prevent dehydration during very dry conditions. So it's sort of a protection system that the trees apply. This is also clearly visible by applying the wavelet analysis. It's a kind of modeling a statistical analysis. I'm not going through the details here. I'm showing here again the growing period between April and October. This is the spectrum of the precipitation events. So the red color means a higher spectrum, basically a higher signal of that specific variable. And so you can see the red points here represent important precipitation events, and these are the temporal scale in terms of hours. In the second panel, you can see the pressure deficit. The vapor pressure deficit basically changes over time. It's very high during the period between August and early September, and which are actually very high hot days. And here, it's very clear the distinction between sap flow in the hislop area and in the riparian area. In the hislop area, at a certain point, due to this dehydration control of the trees, the sap flow tends to decrease, and basically it is very low during the lower part, the final part of the growing seasons. However, the trees in the riparian area, which is wetter and they have more access to water, they keep they keep transpire. So set flow remains high for a longer period. It's almost like as the growing seasons in the riparian trees is longer compared to the trees in the e-slope area. So, and this is the last slide, we were able to combine all these observations and effects to derive a sort of conceptual model of how vapor pressure deficit, temperature, and topography affect set flow or tree response. When soil moisture in the A panel is not a limiting factor, and there is high vapor pressure deficit, so high atmospheric demand and high temperature, the trees tend to actively respond and produce high set flow values that tend to anticipate the vapor pressure deficit peak. However, when soil moisture is a limiting factor and soil moisture becomes lower, also set flow decreases. And there is no this decoupling in time between VPD and set flow. In terms of effect of topography, panel C on the left side, you can see that when VPD and temperature are high, soil moisture is lower, but not as low as in the riparian in the e-slope area. There is still a very relatively high production of set flow, but not as much as during optimal conditions like those in the panel A. However, trees growing on the e-slope area experience a very important reduction in soil moisture that in turn reduces also set flow that actually is lower and peaks well before the vapor pressure deficit. This is basically all, and thanks again, Giulio, for organizing this conference. Thank you all the speakers, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Daniele. And we have two questions from the audience, so please feel free. I think I'm checking. We have probably Maria first. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniele. It was super interesting to hear all this analysis on subflow. I was really intrigued with that subflow data that you mentioned before. So I'm very intrigued by the riparian trees that they are somehow anticipating and also prolonging their growing season. So they are not only coupled to the amount of water that they have available, but they're also able to somehow anticipate. But how do they do when the wet conditions are extreme? I mean, if they have a huge flashy condition, if they do worse in the long term, I mean, if they have a delay where their subflow velocity decreases because they have such a negation that they cannot respire and also transpire, so they are doing worse. That was one of my main questions.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. It's a very good question and also important for practical management and understanding of the processes going on here. The answer is very simple. We don't know. We don't know because we monitor set flow only in one season. We apply this soil water deficit index in order to distinguish between the different drought periods, and we never experienced it very extreme drought conditions. We went to severe, relatively severe conditions, but not extreme, so never extreme. So we actually don't know how the trees in the riparian area might respond to extreme conditions. We arranged all set flow sensors last summer, 2024, through a project with some German institutions. We have no access to the data yet, but it seems that it was not super high and super dry season. So probably we will not know this until another very dry season. But this is, of course, interesting to know how they might react during extreme conditions. If the wet conditions they experience in the riparian area can actually help them to sustain the growing even during super dry. So sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you have any other questions. I don't think they are from the room. So, still people connecting. So, thank you very much to everyone. Like this was quite a successful seminar. Also, I mean, again, we finished late in Italy, but still. We could not start very earlier for Argentinian timing. As I mentioned, just a few remarks. So this is like an ongoing relationship. We hope it will stand. Today we had just some highlights of what could be in the future, the cooperation. So in case you are interested, like just drop us an email and we will be happy to connect more in the future, also to realize projects across the two countries. Thank you very much, and yeah, again, very thank you for staying with us so long.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.